"Don't let them take my cane," the young woman said, her voice shaking beneath the crystal chandeliers, while 200 guests watched a silver-haired socialite kick the white cane across the marble floor of Manhattan's Moretti Hotel and laugh as if cruelty were tonight's most expensive entertainment for everyone. Present, Elena Brooks, 26, blind since a childhood illness, stood alone beside a ruined wedding cake, her full-figured body wrapped in a simple navy dress, one hand searching empty air, while the other protected the tiny paycheck envelope that would keep her mother's electricity on for another cold April week running. She had delivered pastries since dawn for Bellamy Bakery, endured whispered jokes about her weight in the service elevator, and refused to cry when the bride's cousin blamed her for a toppled cake that a drunken groomsman had actually struck with his elbow before slipping quietly into the laughing crowd. 10 feet away, Damian Moretti watched without moving, a 6'3" man in a black tailored suit, the feared mafia boss whose shipping empire, private clubs, and whispered alliances had made judges cautious, criminals obedient, and enemies wise enough to leave New York before receiving his personal attention without any warning. At 38, Damian possessed penthouses, armored cars, and enough money to buy silence by the city block, yet his gray eyes held the emptiness of a man who had buried his younger sister after a betrayal and had never trusted affection, apology, or coincidence again since that winter funeral night. He noticed Elena because she did not beg, even when the bride's cousin seized her wrist and demanded $12,000 for the cake, because Elena merely lifted her chin, swallowed her humiliation, and said, "I will pay for what I broke, but I will not confess to a lie." The ballroom quieted for half a heartbeat, then laughter returned sharper than before, and someone murmured that a woman like her should be grateful to stand near beautiful people, a sentence Elena had heard in different forms at schools, job interviews, restaurants, and the church where her fiancé abandoned her. Her cheeks burned, but she bent carefully, feeling for her cane among polished shoes, until a man deliberately nudged it farther away. That was when Damian crossed the room, each measured step silencing another conversation, his expression calm enough to terrify every person who understood what his calm usually preceded. Elena heard him before she knew he was close. The sudden absence of music, the faint click of an expensive watch against a cufflink, and the controlled breathing of someone accustomed to danger, standing less than a foot away, while the crowd seemed afraid to inhale around him now. She reached forward for balance and collided with a solid chest, her palms flattening against silk and muscle, then instantly withdrew as gasps exploded around her, because touching Damian Moretti without permission was considered reckless, and because 3 armed guards had already stepped from the shadows behind him without speaking. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, unaware of his identity. But the man beside the champagne table moved my cane, and the woman holding my wrist is lying about the cake. I can recognize his cologne, and I heard her promise him $500 near the kitchen door before dinner tonight. The cousin's grip loosened, the groomsman turned pale, and Damian looked past Elena toward the security cameras above the bar, realizing the blind woman everyone had dismissed had reconstructed the deception using sound, scent, timing, and courage, while his celebrated guests had chosen convenience over the obvious truth before them. He lowered himself, retrieved her cane, wiped a smear of frosting from its handle with his pocket square, and placed it gently into her waiting hand. But when his fingers brushed the silver bracelet at her wrist, his composure cracked, because he recognized the inscription his dead sister once wore. Elena felt his hand tighten, not painfully, but as though the small bracelet had pulled him backward through years of grief, and when the cousin ordered security to remove her, Damian rose, stepped between Elena and the crowd, draped his coat over her shoulders, then quietly whispered one word, "Mine." For 3 stunned seconds, no one in the Moretti ballroom moved, because Damian Moretti had never used that word for a woman, not in public, not in private, and certainly not while standing between a blind bakery worker and the most influential families in Manhattan. Elena tightened her fingers around the cane he had returned, confused by the fear spreading through the room, while Damian's coat rested heavily across her shoulders, carrying the faint scent of cedar, rain, and something colder that reminded her of winter stone. "I don't belong to anyone," she said quietly, turning her face toward his voice, and several guests inhaled as if she had just challenged a loaded gun. Damian studied her for a moment, then lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Good. Neither do I." He turned toward the bride's cousin, Vanessa Hale, whose jeweled hand still hovered near Elena's wrist. "Release the security footage." Vanessa forced a laugh and claimed the cameras had malfunctioned, but Damian lifted one finger, and every exit in the ballroom closed at once as his guards moved with silent precision. Then no one leaves until they begin working again. The musicians lowered their instruments, servers froze beside silver trays, and the drunken groomsmen near the champagne table began edging toward a side door until Damian's chief of security, Marco Bellini, blocked him without touching him. Elena heard the shift in breathing and realized the man beside her did not need to shout, because the entire room had already learned to obey his silence. "Mr. Moretti," Vanessa said, suddenly careful, "this is a private family celebration. In my hotel," Damian replied, "under my cameras, with my staff being threatened." Elena turned slightly toward him. "Your hotel?" The faintest trace of amusement touched his voice. Among other things, she should have been frightened, and part of her was, but what unsettled her more was the gentleness with which he had cleaned her cane before returning it, as though her dignity mattered more to him than the spectacle around them. Marco received a tablet from a technician and placed it in Damian's hand. The footage showed the groomsmen stumbling into the cake, Vanessa pulling Elena forward, then slipping $500 into his pocket before ordering him to move the cane. Gasps spread across the room, but Damian did not look at the screen for long. He looked at Elena. "You were right about everything. That does not happen often enough for people to say it out loud," she answered. Damian's jaw tightened, and he faced the crowd. "Her name is Elena Brooks. Use it with respect." Vanessa protested that Elena had still embarrassed the family, but Damian calmly removed a fountain pen from his jacket and signed the cancellation line on a $50 million hotel partnership contract waiting beside the Champagne Tower. "Your family's expansion deal ends tonight." The bride's father went pale. "Over a bakery girl?" Damian's eyes hardened. "Over character. Hers revealed yours." The room fell silent again, but Elena's expression changed when Damian mentioned her name. "How do you know who I am?" she asked. Marco answered before Damian could stop him. "Mr. Moretti had your employment file brought up when he saw the bracelet." Elena's hand moved instinctively to the silver chain around her wrist. "It belonged to a nurse named Sophia. She gave it to me 12 years ago after I helped her during a subway fire." Damian's control fractured so subtly that only Elena, listening from inches away, noticed his breath stop. Sophia had been his younger sister, and the official report claimed she died alone in that fire before Damian could reach her. "Tell me what happened," he said. Elena heard command in his voice, but beneath it lived something wounded. "Not here." Before he could answer, she stepped away from the crowd, her cane tapping across the marble toward the service corridor. Damian followed personally, leaving billionaires, politicians, and frightened relatives behind without explanation. In the quiet kitchen hallway, Elena removed his coat and held it toward him. "You protected me, but that word you used made everyone think I was property." Damian accepted the correction without anger. "Then I chose the wrong word." "Why did you choose it?" He looked at the bracelet again. "Because the last person who wore that belonged to my family, and everyone I failed to protect was taken from me." Elena's expression softened, but she did not offer pity. "Protection is not ownership, Mr. Moretti." "Damian," he said, "only if you call me Elena." For the first time that night, his mouth almost curved into a smile. Then Elena's phone vibrated inside her purse. She answered, listened for 2 seconds, and every trace of color left her face. Her mother's frightened voice whispered through the speaker that 2 men were waiting outside their apartment, demanding the bracelet Elena had worn to work. Damian heard every word, and the softness disappeared from his eyes. "Marco, lock down the building," he ordered, already guiding Elena behind him as the lights in the service corridor suddenly went dark. Somewhere beyond the kitchen door, a man's voice said, "Bring us the blind girl, and nobody gets hurt." Damian moved before the darkness could settle, pulling Elena behind the steel service counter as a suppressed shot cracked through the kitchen door and shattered a row of hanging winner glasses where her head had been seconds earlier. "Stay close to my voice," he said, one hand shielding the back of her neck while his other drew a pistol from beneath his jacket. But Elena gripped his sleeve and whispered, "There are 3 of them, not 1. The first man is near the door, the second is breathing behind the freezer, and the third just stepped into water beside the sink." Damian heard only silence, yet he trusted her immediately. He fired once toward the overhead sprinkler pipe, flooding the dark kitchen with cold water, and when one attacker cursed and slipped, Marco's security team stormed through the opposite entrance, disarming him before the others could escape. The lights returned to reveal broken glass, overturned trays, and Damian standing in front of Elena, with blood streaking one white cuff where a fragment had cut his arm. She reached toward the sound of his breathing. "You're hurt. It's nothing." Men always say that when they are bleeding on expensive clothing. Despite the danger, Marco almost smiled, but Damian's expression remained hard as he examined the captured gunman. A black serpent tattoo curled behind the man's ear, the symbol of Victor Sands, a rival crime boss who had spent years searching for evidence that could destroy the Moretti family. "Why does Sands want her bracelet?" Marco demanded. The attacker laughed through a split lip. "Because Sofia Moretti hid more than jewelry before she died." Damian's face became unreadable, but Elena felt his body go still beside her. The gunman claimed the bracelet contained access to a private bank vault holding records of secret payments, political bribes, and names of traitors inside Damian's organization. Before Marco could question him further, the man bit down on something hidden between his teeth and collapsed unconscious, leaving behind only a burned photograph in his coat pocket. It showed Sofia standing outside St. Pier, Vincent's hospital 12 years earlier, one hand resting on the shoulder of a younger Elena, whose eyes were already clouded from the illness that had taken her sight. On the back, Sofia had written 5 words, "She hears what others miss." Damian turned toward Elena. "My sister knew you before the subway fire." Elena touched the bracelet, struggling to place memories she had buried beneath years of darkness. "She volunteered at the rehabilitation center, where I learned to use my cane. She told me she was hiding from dangerous people, but I thought she meant an abusive boyfriend." Damian's voice lowered. "Sofia was hiding from someone in my family." Marco interrupted with worse news. Elena's mother had vanished from her apartment less than 10 minutes earlier, and security footage showed 2 men forcing her into a gray delivery van headed toward the Brooklyn waterfront. A message arrived on Elena's phone before Damian could issue an order. "Bring the bracelet to Pier 19 by midnight, or your mother disappears forever." Elena's knees weakened, but she refused Damian's hand when he tried to guide her toward a chair. "I'm going." "No," he said. "They want you frightened and alone. They have my mother, and they will have you too if you walk into their trap." Elena turned toward his voice, tears bright against her lashes though none fell. "You protected my dignity in that ballroom. Do not take away my right to fight for the person who protected me my entire life." Damian stared at her, confronted by a courage no armed man in his empire had ever dared show him. He stepped closer, but instead of commanding her, he placed the bracelet gently between her palms. "Then, we go together." Marco warned that Pier 19 belonged to a shell company connected to Victor Sands, and that the entire kidnapping could be designed to lure Damian away from the hotel before a planned attack on his leadership council. Choosing Elena might cost him control of his empire, but Damian did not hesitate. He cancelled the council meeting, ordered every available guard to protect Elena's mother, and personally escorted Elena through the underground garage toward his armored SUV. As rain began striking the concrete entrance, Vanessa Hale appeared beside a black sedan, no longer dressed like a humiliated wedding guest, but wearing the serpent insignia beneath her diamond necklace. "You should have let them blame the blind girl," she said. Damian raised his weapon, yet Elena suddenly lifted one hand. "Wait, she isn't alone." A familiar footstep approached from behind Damian, followed by the click of a gun pressed against his back. Marco's voice turned cold as he said, "Give me the bracelet, Elena, or the man protecting you dies first." Damian did not turn when the gun pressed harder between his shoulder blades, but the stillness in his body became more dangerous than movement, and Elena knew from the silence around them that every guard in the underground garage was waiting for one mistake. "Marco," Damian said, his voice almost calm, "you stood beside my father's coffin, and I spent 15 years cleaning up the blood your family spilled," Marco replied, keeping the weapon steady while Vanessa stepped closer beneath the fluorescent lights, her diamonds flashing like small knives. Elena tightened her fingers around the bracelet. She could hear rainwater dripping from the SUV, the uneven breathing of two hidden men behind the concrete pillars, and another sound that made her heart stop. A woman crying weakly through the open trunk of Vanessa's sedan. "My mother is here," Elena whispered. Vanessa smiled. "Very good. You really do hear what others miss." Damian's eyes shifted toward the sedan, but Marco warned him not to move. Elena's mother, Ruth Brooks, lay bound inside the trunk with silver tape across her mouth, bruised but alive. The kidnappers had never taken her to Pier 19. The message had been designed to force Elena and Damian into the garage, where the hotel's cameras had been disabled by someone with internal access. "Give me the bracelet," Marco ordered, and Ruth walks away. Elena lifted her chin. "You are lying." Marco laughed once. "You cannot see my face. I can hear Vanessa moving toward the trunk, and I can hear the safety coming off her gun." Vanessa froze. Damian used that single second to twist, trapping Marco's wrist and driving him against the SUV. But two hidden men rushed from the pillars with weapons raised. Elena struck the nearest attacker's knee with her cane, sending him into the concrete, while Damian disarmed the second, and Marco fired wildly, the bullet grazing Damian's side before shattering a headlight. Ruth screamed through the tape. Vanessa dragged her from the trunk and held a pistol near her temple. "Enough!" she shouted. "The bracelet, or she dies." Damian pressed one hand against the blood spreading beneath his jacket, yet he stepped in front of Elena anyway. "You will not touch either of them. You are bleeding," Elena said, hearing the strain beneath his words. "I have survived worse. Stop deciding what pain I am allowed to notice." Her hand found his arm, and for one brief moment inside that cold garage, Damian lowered his weapon and let her touch the wound he would have hidden from everyone else. Then Elena removed the bracelet and held it toward Vanessa. "Release my mother first." Vanessa shoved Ruth across the floor, but when Elena extended the bracelet, Damian caught her wrist gently. "No, it is only jewelry. Sophia died, protecting what is inside it." Elena turned her face toward him. "And my mother lived protecting me." Damian's grip loosened because he understood the choice, even if it terrified him. Elena placed the bracelet in Vanessa's palm. Vanessa immediately twisted the clasp, revealing a narrow metal cylinder hidden beneath the engraved plate. Marco seized it and smiled, but nothing was inside. His expression collapsed. Elena spoke softly. "Sophia removed whatever you wanted 12 years ago." Marco struck the bracelet against the SUV in fury, and a tiny strip of black film slid from beneath the lining of Elena's coat sleeve. Damian stared at it, then realized Sophia had hidden the real evidence inside the bracelet's soft inner band, where Elena had felt an unusual ridge earlier that evening. and quietly transferred it while Damian covered her shoulders in the ballroom. "You knew," he said. "I suspected," Elena answered. "Sophia taught me never to trust the first hiding place." Vanessa raised her weapon, but Ruth slammed her shoulder into Vanessa's arm, giving Damian enough time to pull Elena behind him and Marco enough time to escape through the service stairwell with the empty bracelet. Damian's guards finally broke through the locked garage doors and restrained Vanessa, yet Marco vanished into the rain. Inside the SUV, Elena tore a strip from her dress lining and pressed it against Damian's wound, while Ruth watched them with frightened recognition. "Sophia came to our apartment the night before the subway fire," Ruth revealed. "She gave me a key and made me promise never to tell Elena unless a man named Marco betrayed Damian." Ruth reached inside her shoe and removed a small brass key stamped with the number 317. Damian's face hardened. Vault 317 belonged not to Victor Sands, but to the private bank controlled by Damian's uncle, Salvatore Moretti, the man who had raised him after Sophia's death and now chaired the leadership council Damian had cancelled. The black film Elena had saved contained a photograph of Salvatore paying Marco beside the subway entrance only minutes before the fire began. Damian had spent 12 years hunting enemies outside his family, while the man responsible had been sitting at his table every Sunday. His phone rang. Salvatore's voice came through the speaker, warm and familiar. "Bring the girl and the key to Pier 19 before midnight, nephew, or every person still loyal to you will be buried by morning." Damian looked at Elena, wounded, furious, and more afraid for her than for his empire. Elena took his hand before he could order her away. "You are not facing him alone." Then Ruth whispered the final truth that silenced them both. "Elena, Sophia did not save you from that subway fire. You saved her, and before she died, she named you the legal heir to everything Salvatore is trying to steal." Ruth's revelation struck harder than the bullet in Damian's side, but Elena did not let go of his hand, even when his fingers tightened around hers, as though the truth had shifted the ground beneath both of them. "Sophia named me her heir?" Elena asked, her voice barely above the rain hammering the garage entrance. Ruth nodded. "Not to Damian's empire, to the evidence, the accounts, and the foundation she built to protect people trapped by men like Salvatore." Damian looked toward the digital clock above the elevator. 11:18 p.m. 42 minutes remained before Salvatore's deadline, and every second gave the traitor more time to destroy loyal families, erase records, and turn Damian's own soldiers against him. He ordered Ruth taken to a secure medical suite, but Elena refused to leave with her. "Salvatore wants the key, the film, and me," she said. "That gives us leverage." "It gives him a target," Damian answered. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage beneath his shirt, yet his posture remained rigid, his grey eyes colder than the concrete around them. "You are not bait. Then stop treating me like something that must be hidden." She stepped closer, her cane resting against his polished shoe. "You told that ballroom to use my name with respect. Respect means letting me choose." Damian's expression changed, not into surrender, but into something far more difficult for a man like him. Trust. 20 minutes later, a convoy of black SUVs cut through the rain toward Pier 19, where rusted warehouses crouched beside the East River beneath yellow security lights. Elena sat beside Damian in the armored vehicle, listening as he quietly described the layout from surveillance images. One main warehouse, 2 loading cranes, 6 visible guards, and a private office overlooking the dock. He had changed into a clean black shirt, though pain tightened his breathing whenever the SUV turned. Elena reached across the seat and adjusted the bandage beneath his jacket without asking permission. "You keep trying to hide the bleeding," she said. "You keep finding it. People reveal more through silence than words." Damian watched her hands, steady despite everything. "That is what Sophia saw in you. What do you see?" He answered without hesitation. "The only person in this city who has challenged me all night without wanting money, status, or fear in return. Elena's lips parted, but the convoy stopped before she could respond. At 11:47 p.m., Damian walked into the warehouse with Elena beside him, not behind him, while dozens of armed men watched from the shadows. Salvatore Moretti waited beneath a hanging industrial lamp in a charcoal suit, appearing less like a traitor than the respected uncle who had raised Damian after his parents died. Marco stood at his right hand, and Victor Sanz stood at his left, proving the rival boss had been nothing more than a partner in Salvatore's plan. "You brought her," Salvatore said warmly. "I knew grief would make you predictable." Damian's voice remained controlled. "You murdered Sophia." Sophia mistook compassion for strength. Elena heard the contempt beneath his calm and stepped forward before Damian could stop her. No, she understood that power without conscience is only fear wearing an expensive suit. The warehouse fell silent. Salvatore smiled, then ordered Marco to search her. Elena raised both hands but quietly tapped her cane twice against the concrete, the signal she and Damian had agreed upon in the SUV. Damian's hidden teams moved into position outside, while Marco found the brass key inside Elena's pocket. "The film," Salvatore demanded. Elena tilted her face toward him. "Already copied." That was the first twist. Before leaving the hotel, Damian's technicians had transmitted the evidence to judges, federal investigators, and every Moretti captain still loyal to Sophia's memory. Salvatore's smile vanished as phones began vibrating across the warehouse. Men opened messages showing photographs of Salvatore paying Marco, bank transfers to Victor Sanz, and records proving he had ordered the subway fire. Several guards lowered their weapons. "You think paper defeats loyalty?" Salvatore shouted. Damian stepped beside Elena. "No. Truth gives loyalty somewhere better to stand." The second twist came when Victor Sanz turned his gun on Salvatore, demanding the key for himself. Marco reacted first, shooting Victor in the shoulder and sending the warehouse into chaos. Damian pulled Elena behind a steel support beam as gunfire struck the floor, but Elena heard a mechanical groan above them. "The crane cable," she warned. "Someone cut it." A suspended shipping container swung loose, crashing between Damian's men and the exit. Smoke, sparks, and screams filled the warehouse. Salvatore grabbed Elena from behind and pressed a gun against her ribs. Damian emerged from cover with his weapon raised, blood reopening beneath his shirt. "Let her go." Salvatore dragged Elena toward the dock. "Drop the gun, nephew, or Sophia's precious heir joins her in the river." Damian looked at Elena, and for the first time that night, the feared mafia boss appeared powerless. Then Elena drove the brass key into Salvatore's hand, twisted free, and struck his knee with her cane. Damian fired, knocking the weapon from Salvatore's grip without hitting Elena, but Marco rose behind him and aimed directly at Damian's wounded side. Elena heard the click before anyone else. She stepped between them as the shot exploded, and Damian caught her as both of them fell beneath the cold warehouse lights. The gunshot echoed across Pier 19, and Damian caught Elena before her knees struck the concrete, his face losing every trace of control as he searched desperately for blood. "Elena, speak to me." She drew one frightened breath, then touched her ribs and felt the flattened bullet lodged inside the reinforced lining of Damian's coat, which he had placed around her shoulders before entering the warehouse. "Your coat stopped it," she whispered. Relief flashed through his eyes for only a second before Marco raised his weapon again. But this time, Ruth's voice came through the warehouse speakers. "Damian, the West camera is live." Marco froze. From the hotel's secure medical suite, Ruth had accessed the surveillance link Sophia once taught her to use, broadcasting the entire confrontation to federal investigators and every Moretti captain watching from their phones. Marco's confession, Salvatore's threats, and the attempted shooting had all been recorded. Realizing the truth could no longer be buried, several guards turned their weapons away from Damian and surrounded the traitors instead. Salvatore tried to run toward the dock, but Elena heard his uneven footsteps crossing the wet steel ramp. 3 steps to your left, she told Damian. He moved exactly as she instructed and blocked his uncle before Salvatore could reach the waiting speedboat. You would destroy the family Sophia died protecting for a woman you met tonight? Salvatore demanded. Damian glanced back at Elena, still wearing his coat, still standing despite the fear trembling through her hands. No, he answered. I am saving my family because she reminded me what it was supposed to mean. Salvatore lunged for a fallen gun, but Damian stopped him and handed him over to the approaching authorities rather than taking revenge. Marco and Victor were arrested beside him, while the hidden financial records exposed every official they had bribed and cleared the names of the innocent workers they had framed. By sunrise, the Moretti organization had changed forever. Damian dissolved the corrupt partnerships, transferred Sophia's protected accounts into the charitable foundation she had created, and placed its leadership in Elena's hands, not because she needed rescuing, but because Sophia had trusted her judgment long before anyone else understood its value. Elena accepted only after Damian agreed that the foundation would support blind adults, abused workers, and families threatened by organized crime. 3 days later, she returned to the Moretti Hotel ballroom, where the broken wedding cake had started everything. This time, the chandeliers glowed warmly over reporters, hotel employees, and community leaders gathered for the foundation's opening ceremony. Vanessa stood nowhere among them. Her role in the conspiracy had been exposed, and the Hale family publicly apologized to Elena and compensated Bellamy Bakery for every loss. The same guests who had laughed now became silent when Elena entered in her navy dress, her white cane tapping confidently against the marble. Damian waited near the stage, his wounded side bandaged beneath a tailored charcoal suit. He did not reach for her until she extended her hand first. You said one word that frightened an entire ballroom, she told him. I remember, he replied. It was the wrong word. Elena tilted her face toward him. What would you say now? Damian lowered himself to one knee, not with a ring or a demand, but with Sophia's restored bracelet resting across his open palm. Chosen, he whispered. The room fell silent again, but this time Elena did not feel like an object being claimed. She felt seen. Damian fastened the bracelet around her wrist and stood beside her while she addressed the crowd, giving her the stage instead of speaking for her. She told them blindness had never made her weak, her body had never made her less worthy, and cruelty only survived when good people chose comfort over courage. Damian listened with the faint smile no enemy had ever seen, and when the applause rose, he placed his hand gently over hers. Months later, Elena still worked with Bellamy Bakery twice a week because she loved the smell of warm cinnamon and refused to let wealth erase the life that had shaped her. Damian drove her there himself whenever he could, frightening the delivery drivers until Elena teased him into carrying flour sacks like everyone else. Ruth recovered fully and moved into a sunny apartment near the foundation, where she often reminded Damian that protecting Elena did not mean controlling her schedule. He learned to ask instead of command, to speak instead of retreating into silence, and to trust that love could remain without being guarded by fear. Elena learned she no longer needed to apologize for taking up space. One quiet evening, they stood together on the hotel rooftop as Manhattan lights shimmered beneath them. Damian wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and Elena smiled. Still trying to claim me? He kissed her forehead and answered, No, just grateful you keep choosing me. The blind woman everyone underestimated had exposed a conspiracy, saved a wounded empire, and taught its most feared man that tenderness was not weakness. And the mafia boss, who once believed love always ended in betrayal, finally discovered a home in the woman brave enough to challenge him in the dark. Do you think Damian whispered the right word when he chose Elena in front of everyone? Share your answer and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of danger, dignity, and love that sees what the world overlooks.